Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan, for introduction. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I think same week last year, we were in this hotel. And NSIT and IHPP have been thinking about what should be the best that we want to collect the input. And we want to encourage every effective participant to share your thought, to share your ideas, and try to make the good proposal for the policy coherence. With it, we know that trade and health is a too big name inside. Even in NSIT in Thailand, we have a strong membership, both trade and health team. Sometimes we are friends and sometimes we are enemy. And most of the time we are enemy in these two terms. So we love to join in this type of program, try to make the best of it, where it's the optimum point, where it's a well-balancing point to move the thing together. And last year, you can see the subject that we're talking about, it's paradigm shift. And we want to move that what we have been doing for many years from reactive mode or negative mode, or wait until the last minute or emergency mode to move the trade and health together. It doesn't work. So we try to shift gear to be more proactive, more trust associated, more the partnership that we have to be together. The trade alone without consider health, they will last long. And at the same time, when we talk about the health and health, forget about the trading, also won't last long either. So that kind of the game that we want to continue to pursue, to collect the idea, collect the thought from everyone, and try to propose the policy. So, as the chairman of the NSIT, we like to thanks to everyone, thank to organizer, thank to the moderator, thank to the speaker. I think you can see we see a lot of family name and person inside this type of event. So I like to declare the opening, and we wish that these 2 hours of session, I want to encourage everyone, raise the hand, voice out your opinion, voice out your thought, and we want to correct and try to optimize to the best package at the end of the game. Thank you.
Dr. Samphan Silapana, the chair of the NSIT, for your warm remarks. So next, I would like to invite Dr. Sweet Mangkala, the Deputy Director General of the Department of ASEAN Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Thailand, to take a floor. Please, Dr. Sweet.
Very well, welcome to all of you. Probably not a familiar faces to you, but I believe that this floor, this platform, and this session is going to be all yours. Okay, so I'm going to be doing my job as a moderator. I will try to keep in time. We have until 4 o'clock this afternoon. So with the valuable time, can I invite my honorable speakers, 2 of them right here, and I think we have one joining us online, right? Is she here already? She joined us online or still not? Okay, it's okay. We can proceed, please. Right. Let me again welcome all of you to this PMAC 2024 site meeting. And the title of this session is WHO Pandemic Agreement, Opportunities for Trade and Health. And let me begin by quoting an article that I got from the organizers earlier. There is an article called the WHO Pandemic Treaty, the good, the bad, the ugly. And it's an interview of Larry Gostin. Okay, I don't know whether you know him, but I'm not in the area. I'm not the expert. I'm from the ASEAN department. I'm doing a moderating work, but this is eye-opening for me. And this is going to be very intriguing for myself personally, but I'm sure that once we have the panelists speaking and you join us in a discussion, we're going to have something very valuable in terms of deliberation this afternoon. Here, we all know that we are at a critical juncture, trying to get to the historic milestone. The WHO has already set a May 2024 deadline for negotiations, as mentioned by the director. And on this pandemic accord, it is set to conclude at the 27th World Health Assembly in Geneva. The question is whether it will include the kind of robust norms necessary to ensure that the new accord is transformative with respect to correcting disparities and injustices uncovered in the last pandemic. We have witnessed this in the last pandemic. Definitely the COVID-19 has taught us a lot of lessons, and whether it would be effective in its enforcement, whether they're going to be the norms that will be enforced effectively. So this is the main questions, actually. So let me thank the organizers once again that you put together all of us here to ensure that we talk about these two enemies most of the time, as mentioned by Dr. Sampan, trade and health. But they are interlinked, and global health, health security, or even sustainable development, they're all very crucial concepts that, you know, the world at large is trying to achieve. And basically, at this session, we would try to deliberate on certain things. And the key objectives of this is that one is to discuss the negotiation, which is taking place right now on the WHO Pandemic Concord that I have mentioned, and what would be the potential contributions to health and trade policy coherence. Second is to discuss the role of geopolitics, which is very crucial. It's the real opportunities to have the WHO Pandemic Concord, but at the same time, it's challenging. There are lots of challenges. And as mentioned by director, we have sticky points or pain points that we have to address. So geopolitics comes in, and this probably will have to be discussed to a certain extent to ensure that the INB process can proceed without interruption or even, you know, failure. And last but not least, we want to provide recommendations to both health and trade sectors to negotiation the WHO pandemic agreement successfully. Without further ado, I would try to introduce my first speaker first. My first speaker, I will do it one by one so we don't waste the time. My first speaker is Dr. Sawapak. Enjoy. Please, a round of applause for her. She has a background in veterinary medicine, and she graduated with a doctorate in public health from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She currently holds the position of Director of Office of International Cooperation, Department of Disease Control, Ministry of Public Health of Thailand. She is very enthusiastic about developing collaborations in public health research. And of course, she is working on very hard on the One Health concept. She also serves as a national coordinator in developing effective public health control and prevention strategies with a perspective of global health security. Today, what I would ask her to do is to set the tone of the discussion by giving the experience from Thailand, and especially in COVID-19 response, and what would be the capacity gap that Director mentioned in the introduction, and also highlight the core capacity and critical instruments in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, both within and beyond the health sector, such as the legal and regulatory measures, what we call EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization for countermeasures, including vaccines and medicines. She will also underscore the importance of using a whole of the society approach, I believe, and the use of the special legal instruments. So I give the floor to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much for inviting me for join this panel discussion. And today, as in our honorable MC already in the invite, already introduced me that my background is veterinarian. So that means you can imagine that when I work at the Department of Disease Control, Ministry of Public Health, that's most of my colleagues are from in the human sector. So that means our ministry really highlight on the One Health collaboration, multi-sectoral collaboration. So the same, when we said that in the COVID-19 response, at the beginning, if you remember, we think about it can be like a from zoonotic disease when we have a lot of like the people that show like a respiratory symptoms. And according to we think about is related within the SARS that already occurred in there many years ago. And it can be zoonotic disease, but after that, when the like epidemiological information provide that okay, it's a human to human transmission. But anyway, this is not even though it's not zoonotic disease, but we can see that COVID-19, even though we just look at in the health sector, I think that we cannot respond, we cannot do like this in part, even though we just think it is a human sector. So that means we need a lot of collaboration. So for today, I would like to provide you, according to our topic, this is about the opportunity for trade and health. How we can know about the opportunity? That means we need to know, even though we think about in the like a SWOT analysis. That means when we know opportunity, we have to know threat, right? We have to know weakness or the strength. So that means I would like to provide you about in our experience from Thailand when we deal within the COVID-19 response and what we see from the gaps, and it can be related to in the like at the global level, like the pandemic accord or the pandemic treaty. I will give you like a time machine back to in the past at the beginning of the outbreak. During the time in December, we have heard that in China have pronounced a lot of like a mystery outbreak that occurs like a cluster. And that time in the department at in the Municipal of Thailand, we have a team that we call WASH team, situation awareness team. It does not occur for the COVID-19 response. Actually, during in the avian influenza in 2004 or 5, we already set this team to monitor situation around the world. And then we sent our signal up in this outbreak to our policy maker like a command. That means we have this team every week to monitor on the situation. And then on in the we can see that something is kind of like a very like a challenging because in the it's not kind of a normal situation. So we are in the if I remember on in the 4th January we activate EOC Emergency Operation Center. That means after the we activate we can call like the people in the just not only in the bureau of in the epidemiology to watch situation. That means we can activate other people to help us like a team in the line of command. And then we can detect, we could detect like the first case of in the COVID-19 outside China, I think around in the 8th or 10th January. So that means early detection is important. So how we can do kind of in this early detection? How we can detect this case? According to our point of entry, officer and staff at the point of entry, they know the names. Actually, in there at the point of entry, there's not only the health officer, but immigration officer also work like a team. So that means early detection, it does not only for the health sector, but immigration sector is can help. So the early detection is a keyword. It's not only health sector to respond this kind of work. And also after that, after we can detect we know this sign, we send the report throwing the IHR point and get to in the WHO Thailand office in Thailand and so to like a 0. That means we go in the step. We follow in the article that provide us in the followed by according to the international health regulation. So we can see that for in the next pandemic, early detection, and even though we like follow other like international health regulation, that means we can help other country alarm and prepare themselves for the next pandemic as well. So this is one lesson learned that we learned from the COVID-19. And then after the weekend, we could detect the first case of COVID-19 outside China. That means because this is an emerging disease, we didn't have kind of like a laboratory or in the diagnostic tool, right? That means we have to work within the laboratory partner to expand laboratory network. At this like only like that's mean in the one we set the timeline for that in the 1 month, all like the like huge city like main provinces. That means they have to like set the laboratory to test for the COVID-19. And we can expand the laboratory network for testing for the COVID-19 testing, cover all the provinces within the thing during the 3 or 4 months later. So that means the laboratory network is important. And how we can like engage epidemiologists and laboratory to work together. Because you can imagine in the it's kind of like the our in the Ministry of Health, we are in the different department. So epidemiology in the under like a Department of Disease Control, and the laboratory is under in the Department of Medical Science. So that means we need to provide the platform that both the epidemiologists and the laboratory can share information. So this is another like the big things that we have to think database and like provide like sharing information between department. And then so even the for detected up in the COVID-19, it is not only in the governmental hospital, but actually private hospital and other like it can be like a hospital under in the academic institution, they can detect as well. So that means we have to provide a platform that can share information among the sector. And the sharing information needs the real time. That's meaning the big gaps. How we can provide that platform and sharing information in the real time. So this is important thing too. And so when the outbreak just like expand through like many countries, and Thailand and the Department of Medical Science, they like collaborate through within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because our neighboring countries, sometimes in there some countries they didn't have enough capacity of the laboratory to detect the pathogens. So we throw in the like a diplomatic channel, we can work together within our neighboring country to set the laboratory and sell like some medical supply equipment and trade for in those in our neighboring country in the region. So that means even though we can strengthen the laboratory network, it does not only between the sector, but even though we can accord and help together by working within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and strengthen the lab, like a regional laboratory network is mean that we can respond the emerging infectious disease is much better. And after that, we have like heard that in some country already like implemented lockdown, right? And okay, we just stay in home. We know about the new words like a work from home. And I never using the Zoom. Okay, that's the first time, and I use the Zoom too. So when we ask the people to stay in the home, right? We have like a curfew. It means that if the health sector talk, okay, don't go out at that time. I think don't want listen. That means we need like the security sector to help. So like you can at that time, Thailand, we announced like we call it the emergency decree to that means all the sector come together and join that. And so the Prime Minister is the like the chief, I mean this time. Actually, for in if we would like to contain the disease, communicable disease, in Thailand we have in the Communicable Disease Act. That means that we have authority to contain the disease. But this is an emerging infectious disease, the new thing that occur. So that means we have to work work under the law that we call emergency decree. And this is important. That means in the it's kind of like a war room. We have like all the people or the community they come together. And you can see that how important often the day, according to sometimes it's a hard measure. Maybe hard measure, even though you implement the hard measure, it can be like yield a lot of impact, right? That means we have to like force some factory, we have to force a lot of things like industry or the tourism and affect to tourism. So that means every day they have to balance between what in the hard measure and what in the economic impact. So even though we can, even though what we can do, that means legal preparedness is a keyword. Sometimes in the when we have it's just for example when avian influenza that emerged in the Thailand in the many years ago. At the time, that means animal and human populations. Actually, for the livestock sector, they also have their own gender legal instrument that we call the animal like epidemic as well. So that's mean in the even though we define what in the how many related legal instruments that in the involved in the some in the outbreak. So we can prepare things. That means even though we can map what in the how maybe some duplicate, maybe some article in the each act have like some conflict somehow. So that means the legal preparedness and see how related each other can help us to respond depending on the outbreak in the better way. And then after that, we can see that in the some countries, so Thailand, we already have like a travel restriction. This is a huge impact. So that means when the travel restriction occur, it's hard like for the people because they would like to come to like a homeland. They have to travel because there's some family in the other country. So in that time, we have like a I have this like a Ministry of Public Health talk a lot within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because we have to like evacuate the people back to the country and how we can talk within the ICAO, how we can talk within the like a lot of in the ministry that related to us. So that means we have to prioritize. We have to like a limitation of in the people, even that they would like to go back to Thailand. If I remember, for the first day when we start to like evacuate, or we just only like limited for the 200 people. This is too small, even the compared to like a demand of the people that they would like to go back. So that means we have to prioritize the people. So travel restriction is kind of like the new thing that occur. Actually, from the WHO recommendation, this never recommend to WHO travel restriction. But in the real right, we have this, and it's just not only one country, but it's kind of like a dynamic to like to all the country have that. So the travel restriction or like the protocol, how we can make a decision right now. We need to in the restrict for the traveler. I think this is important. That it can be a part of in the article in the pandemic accord because they have like a different either decision. It depends on the country. And after that, and so it can be the like a lot of kiosks that occur among within the country. As you know that in Thailand we had a lot of like migrant workers that work in Thailand. So when we said that travel restriction, at that time we in our department we have in the like hotline that we call 1422. We got a lot of phone call from the migrant workers that they said in the neighboring language. They ask, okay, even though you course the point of adding the point of entry and how they can go back and it's very key hours. And sometimes some people would like to, even though we course the point of like at the border area, and sometimes they would like to work in Thailand. That means they just like try to like come to Thailand without any registration. That means we call illegal migrant workers. So that means you can see that because we have to deal within the like a kiosk every time when we announce the travel restriction. So that means we need the guideline or the protocol when we have to provide the guideline for the travel restriction. And then after we have the travel restriction, and that time in the I think maybe around in the we start have think about in the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, these are the huge things issue as well. For the everyone know that we using the like emergency use authorization for the vaccine. The one thing that we concern about in the liability risk management, because in the we don't know what in the adverse event or in the side effect from the COVID-19 vaccine, but we know that we would like to increase the vaccine coverage. It's like a to make like a herd immunity. So that's mean in Thailand we make a decision that we use that we call in the like no fault compensation policy. That's mean even the supporting the people after they got the vaccine, right? COVID-19 vaccine, and they have like maybe they show like a side effect or the adverse events. Okay, we don't need to investigate and blame who's gonna be punished on that. Our government pay, even that they have to like get to into the hospital. Because we don't want them to worry about in the anything that we just want them to get the vaccine and protect and improve, increase the immunity. So that's we call in the no fault compensation mechanism to increase the vaccine coverage. So it means that it depends on the government to take that their own compensation to use their money to provide that. So that's meaning there maybe it can be the good reason, even that this happen again for the any vaccine or the any treatment that is kind of like an emergency use authorization. How we can deal with it. Even the country, maybe in there some country in like an infrastructure or in the like a financial mechanism is not ready for that. How we can deal with it. That means there it can be another like a lesson learned for the pandemic as well. And for the vaccine, and I remember some country for Thailand, we have like a different platform of vaccine, like mRNA, vector vaccine or something, right? It depends on the negotiation. It depends on the like the policy that how we can import the vaccine, which type of vaccine. But when we travel to other country, maybe some countries say that, okay, if you didn't receive mRNA vaccine, you cannot go to my country, right? That means we can see that how in the people, because sometimes they have really and that time we need to deal with in the student that have to study abroad. And we can see that in the how students so worried that in the even they didn't receive the mRNA, how they can go back to some country. So that means we can see that vaccine, a variable vaccine, it can be the good point, and also it can be obstacle for some people because in that country have like their own requirement. So this is can be like another way to learn that we can put that into the like for the next two like a pandemic across as well. And this kind of the thing that this is it's just not only from my observation, but actually Thailand, we have been to many tools. It's kind of like a review tool, reviewing tool. For example, interaction review that the tool provided by WHO. And also we have been to for like a UHPR, Universal Health Preparedness Review, and also from in the IHR, JE, second law that we just part in the last year. So that means this is all in the observation and this already present when we deal within the COVID-19 response. So I would like to finish in my first slide here that in the reflects what in the going on in the Thailand, and it can be like some tips that in there to make it a better way for the next pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that's very fascinating in terms of trying to look back at the experience that we had. And in case anyone can't remember, we already gone through the time machine. Right, Dr. Just let us see the stories and how we try to cope with the situation that we didn't expect that it was going to happen. But I think, in no time, we probably have to experience another pandemic very soon. So in case of what Dr. had just mentioned, that we already had the stories, had the lessons learned. We did highlight, you highlight about the importance of early detection and also how to set up the mechanisms within the government and also cross-sectoral coordination, also the network that you need, in terms of trying to make sure that you understand the disease itself. And also when you talk about the legal instrument, that's very important as well when we need some kind of legal preparedness. That's the word that you mentioned. And of course, the risk management that you mentioned in terms of vaccine. You talk about no fault compensation mechanism. That's very unique, I think, in terms of how Thailand government has dealt with the pandemic, the last pandemic that we had to cope with. But that's the national experience, okay? And you mentioned yourself that we have different situations in different countries, different national interests, of course, that comes in. I think Dr. Viviana already joined us on screen. Dr. Viviana, hello. And I'm going to ask her about geopolitics as well, since she probably knows much about that. And of course, different countries have different policies and visions, but we share the same experience. COVID-19 is the experience that we all share. And I believe I'm coming to the second speaker of ours today. And I think the pandemic concord would provide us opportunities for a paradigm shift, I believe. It's something that we look forward to, not status quo. I believe that's why we are trying to work on this concord. So I would like to ask you for your general and specific comments on the draft WHO pandemic agreement that is being discussed now in the INB. Also the challenging issues, the sticky points, the pain points, something to do with, whatever that you've been working on very hard on the IPR, also the technological transfer. Before I move to the second speaker, by the way, I forgot to introduce you. Dr. Manisha Shitha is the regional advisor for intellectual property, trade, and public health at the World Health Organization Regional Office for Southeast Asia, WHO Zero. We all know her, I think. She works very hard on the interface of intellectual property rights, IPRs, trade, and health. Dr. Shitha also received her master's degree in LLM in law, in intellectual property law, with specialization in patent and biotechnology technology law, and obtained certification for international mediation on IPR disputes from Franklin Pierce Law Center, USA. Her doctorate was on technology, innovation, and patent activity in Indian industry. It's from the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. And she also had work experience, a vast experience in the state government and also the federal government. She was responsible for public health programs. She used to be the joint secretary with the Ministry of Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises in the government of India as well. And you drafted policy and briefing documents for various deliberations related to the WTO negotiations, trade agreements with ASEAN and other FTAs negotiated by the government of India. I think without further ado, you have all the quality in the world to talk about this pandemic concord. So let me invite you please to the podium with your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Suvit, for your introductory remarks. In fact, Dr. Suvit has a very famous name. We actually, yes, yeah, but Dr. Suvit has really influenced a lot of WHO work, and we are very grateful to him also for the leadership that he provides in Zero. So thank you for this introduction. And I also want to thank Dr. Suryavam, Dr. Chayan, and the entire IHPP team, Dr. Sampan, in preparation for this conference, they gave us very clear synopsis. And I think what I tried to do in this was to take the points that they mentioned, and I have tried to address it. And I think our preparatory meeting was very critical to bring these aspects forward. So as a lot has been discussed, and I thank my fellow panelist, Dr. Savapak, for giving the background, because it really needs to be refreshed when we are looking at an accord. You know, sometimes when something has happened and you sit back in a very comfortable room, we forget what we were actually dealing with. So it's important to understand what the situation was so that we can come up with something very tangible and to make it happen. So I just want, this has already been covered, the introduction. I'm not going to spend time on this, but this is a zero document of the pandemic treaty that we are discussing. And as was mentioned by Dr. Surivan in the beginning, this was actually decided in December 21 that we should go ahead with a pandemic treaty. And it is important that in the third bullet is important because we are looking at the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which is the only other treaty which was negotiated by the WHO. This is important because WHO came into being in 1948, more than 75 years. This is the second time we are going to go ahead with a treaty mechanism. And we want to know why a treaty and whether we can, what is it that we can learn from the FCTC and how it is different from the FCTC. So this is very important for us. So when you actually look at the legal constitution of WHO, there are these are the three different articles in the WHO constitution, which guide our work on the legal front. In fact, this is Dr. Sovabak just mentioned that legal clarity is very important, especially when we are going ahead with an accord. So Article 19 is where we could negotiate a convention. As we are well aware, the FCTC, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, that was negotiated under Article 19. All of our WHO resolutions are in the last one, the Article 23. I think it has not come up completely on this slide. But Article 23 actually covers all our WHO resolutions, the World Health Assembly resolutions, which we are doing year on year. And incidentally, the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework, the framework or the PIPF, is under the Article 23, which is a WHO resolution. The second one, which is the Article 21, is where our international health regulations have come about, which is a regulation and is stronger than the resolutions that we do every year. So if you look on the right side, the top 19 is the treaty, then Article 21 is the regulation, the international health regulations, and the last one are the resolutions which we are doing year on year. And why is this important? This is important because now we are looking at a treaty in Article 19, where a lot of the work that we have done under pandemic influenza preparedness framework, the one that we did for access and benefit sharing, which is under Article 23, which is not as binding as Article 19 in the treaty. A treaty is the strongest international, multinational instrument that we have. So this is important to see because what we are going to do is to pick up some learnings from Article 23 PIP framework and push it up in Article 19 to make sure that we get a binding mechanism in this. So this is very important in that regard. We'll try to be fast so that we have time. So if we actually look at the different points, the first point which was given to us is what is the general comments on the draft WHO pandemic agreement? We have just had a bit of discussion in the previous slide where I gave the legal context. So the report of the meeting, which is currently under discussion in the executive board, was presented, is the report dated 4th January 2024. It is the latest one. And the 7th meeting of the INB, which took place, the last meeting which this report is capturing, is in the second bullet points. And we need to be very proud that in our region, both Thailand and Indonesia are being very active in the negotiation of the treaty. We are fortunate that Dr. Viroj is actually one of the vice chairs and he's actively pursuing the work in the pandemic treaty. So in fact, we should have invited Dr. Viroj also to be part of this panel so that he gave us the inside story and what is actually happening in the negotiations. But more importantly, when we look at this treaty, we are expecting that in May 24, we should have some draft to begin with. And I will show you when we are looking at the IHR and the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework, or more importantly, FCTC. It takes a number of years. So we are actually being very ambitious if we think that we're going to have a treaty in May. So I'll just show you the number of years and you'll be seeing how long it takes for us to negotiate the treaty. And even the regulation, the treaty FCTC was in the top one. The regulation itself took many years. I have a slide on that, which I think you will find interesting. But more importantly, when the Director General addressed us, he mentioned these two blue bullet points. What he said was that the PIPF framework and the international health regulations, we need to look at them and then urge coherence to get the treaty going. So we have the IHR 2005, which is, as I mentioned, the regulation. And we have the resolution in 23 in the PIPF, the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework. And what is it that we are learning from both? And we push them up to form the treaty. So this was the direction given by the Director General. And then, of course, there are these subgroups. And what is important is the Article 12 is being chaired by Dr. Viroj, and the 10, 11, and 13 are by Indonesia. This is just to say that our region and the WHO CRO is very active, and this is very important. And the 8th meeting, the next meeting is slated in March 2024. Now, what is important is, this is the 1B is what the IHPB and ITH, your entire team, Mr. Sampan, asked me to cover. This was to provide general comments on the draft that we have so far. So this draft just now has 36 articles. They are covering over 3 chapters. And the preamble really sets the base, because the preamble says in para 10, recognizing the protection of IPR is important for the development of new products, but that IPR should not prevent member states from taking measures for public health. So this is very critical when they are looking at how patents turn out and the rest of the intellectual property rights. We talk a lot about patents, but when the vaccines were actually moving, even the trademarks became very important, because those big vials, as you have just mentioned on vaccine distribution, they had to be located to the jab which the nurse is going to put to the person, because it had to be going back to relate to the indemnification clauses and legal agreements, and which is what you just mentioned, that Thailand was paying for that rather than any other aspect. So those parts were important. So the trademark aspects as to where the barcoding would go and what would be the information on that were also discussed when WHO established the COVAX facility. A lot of work was done on barcoding on that. So apart from patents, which is usually discussed, these other IPRs are also important. So one of the aspects the pandemic treaty should look at is not just patents and access to medicines in that and diagnostics and other medical products, but also some of the other IPRs are important. So these are the Article 10, 11, 12, 13, which are very critical for our discussion today when we are looking at the interface of trade and patents and availability and access to medicines. And more importantly, when we are looking at Article 10, we are looking at a more equitable geographical distribution. This was critical. Dr. Subhapat just mentioned about the different mRNA vaccine. We had the cell-based, we also had the AstraZeneca vaccines, the Pfizer, the Moderna, all those vaccines had different bases and different R&D went behind that. So how is it that they would be available and what kind of a distribution mechanism is important in terms of geographical distribution? Also, it should not be a hindrance to trade. As she mentioned that if you don't have a Pfizer vaccine, then you cannot enter my country. Those kind of issues are another aspect which it would be useful if the INB looks at when they are negotiating as to how they will bring about equity in terms of interpretation and also the science that has gone behind the vaccines. So in terms of access and benefit sharing, we are looking, and all through in the treaty text, they talk about a WHO pathogen access and benefit sharing system. And they have also a very detailed definition of the pathogens. And they have also agreed in terms of, the question is to look at time-bound waivers of IPR to accelerate and scale up the manufacture of pandemic-related products. As you know, in the WTO, South Africa and India worked very hard to get a waiver for the COVID-19 vaccines. But in actual practice, that waiver has not really been used because between the decision and between the availability of the waiver and then further to translate it into manufacture and availability of products, there is a large time gap. And it is critical when we are looking at a pandemic, and as has just been stated, time is of essence. So how the pandemic accord and the INB look at, we have to get things going which make things available in a good period of time. And the last bullet mentions the two instruments which have given us the background to our work so far in WHO and which we are trying to take forward when we are looking at the pandemic. I put this slide just to give you an idea that, you know, when we started serious negotiation of IHR, how long it took. So we started in 1995 and we came about with something in 2007. So it takes very long to actually negotiate. And this was the international health regulations that we were negotiating. This is the timeline of the FCTC. And if you see, we started in 1996. We actually came up with an entry into force in 2005. So it takes more than 10 years it has taken for the treaty to come up. And then the latest position I have indicated here is 2024. We now have 183 parties to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And the last entry is by Malawi, which is in 2023 August, which can show you that this is still ongoing. You know, we have the members took their time to even accede to this treaty. So the process is long. It's not once we even have a text, it takes so long to get the countries to finally ratify it and comment on it. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. These are the IHR core capacities, and this is something which I would borrow from what my fellow panelists, Dr. Surupat, has just mentioned. These are the legislative and policy aspects that were covered in the IHR. So we look at the legislation, the coordination, legislation and policies on the left side. And then the potential hazards are in the middle. So we have the infectious diseases, but if we are looking at a pandemic treaty, we probably need to look at all these other aspects and how it would relate to the pandemic. But this is just to cover what IHR is covering, and there has to be synergy between the instruments. And the points of entry are very important. It is also important, which was mentioned in the 3 bullets down. It's a little small, but I was trying to put more material onto the slide. What it says is that the state's duty to share with WHO the information. So one of the things, as you just mentioned, that there's a time lag between when we assess there is something which is of concern and how fast we can convey to the countries. The problem in this was that every time negative information was conveyed, the countries reacted very negatively also. So can we have something in the accord where countries react positively to it and say, well, we have this information, what can we do together better? You just mentioned collaboration and cooperation. I think that is critical when we are trying to address the pandemic and such global events for everyone. And the second is that to minimize the interference in international trade and travel. That was the genesis of the IHR, to minimize the information, the interference in trade and travel. That was very critical. And of course, we need to look at all the events. This is just to state that if you look, my previous colleague just mentioned about the different ministries that you have to deal with. She has mentioned about One Health and also about the points of entry. And if you look at it, these are the different departments that need to be collaboration, has to be established at a national level. And this is what has been done in the IHR. And these are the functional areas which are affected by IHR are given on the left side. So public health, of course, has to lead, but you have the environment, you have the airports, the point of entry, the customs. You know, for some time when the medical products and devices, particularly, we were trying to, in WHO, send them to different countries. There were issues on the customs borders. So these, we need to have an understanding as to what is the product coming and how we need to move forward. Then in terms of transportation, that is very important. So, and on the right side, these are all the different ministries. You talked about collaboration, and this is really critical. And so when we are looking at the pandemic accord, we need to address how this will be done. Because the reason why we have to look at the accord is many of these have international agencies responsible. So for example, if you look at the customs, you have the World Customs Union, and actually we had to connect with them in terms of movement of some products, and they also came up with an advisory on how movement will take place internationally. So in an accord, when we look at international boundaries, some of these are at a national level, but the international bodies need to be connected so that we are able to get a meaningful outcome from it. So the second point which I was asked to cover was to underscore what is the prevention, preparedness, and response, and to what extent the draft pandemic agreement has these elements. So what I have done is actually, because IHR, we are clear, was for an international concern, the pandemic influenza preparedness framework came up with a different background. It came up because Indonesia decided not to share viruses for making vaccines for influenza. And for the first time, we were looking at access and benefit sharing. So while the IHR's genesis is to prevent any interference in trade and travel and to promote across borders cooperation for public health, we actually have this PIPF, which is, as I mentioned, a resolution. Its genesis is the access and benefit sharing. And this came about because also of a previous international instruments, which is the Convention on Biodiversity. And you must have heard about the Nagoya Protocol, which talked about access and benefit sharing. So this is very important because this brings for the first time that if Indonesia mentioned that if they are sharing the viruses, and when the vaccine is produced, they have to pay large amounts for the influenza vaccine. So can we do better in this? And this is a mechanism which is currently alive and working very well in WHO, because the manufacturers who are using the viruses to make the vaccine every year for the influenza viruses are actually paying WHO a contribution. And that contribution has been defined, or the elements of that contribution. And certain countries their lab capacity, which you mentioned was very critical, is being developed as part of the outcomes due to this PIPF framework. So this is an accord which becomes very important in the context of how access and benefit sharing has resulted in a positive mechanism, and where for the first time, manufacturers themselves are paying to WHO. You know, we talk about the demand side of what we want in access for medical products. And as you know, medical products are medicines, vaccines, diagnostics, and devices. But this is the supply side. The pharmaceutical companies are paying here when they are using the viruses. So this is an important mechanism. And some of the learnings from that could be very useful when we are looking at the accord. So they have defined influenza virus with human pandemic potential, and that is some of the details. I will not go into it. But more important in this, we need to look at how the laboratories were sharing this information. And this could be critical if we look at these GIS-RIS laboratories. Can we do better in terms of sharing information if we have any potential pandemic threat? And perhaps this aspect also needs to be built in when we are looking at how the national network of laboratories should link up internationally as well, so that we get the information right on time and way ahead, and so that the science can the science which actually, if you look at it, the science delivered. We did get a new vaccine in terms of mRNA vaccines, and even the AstraZeneca, the Oxford vaccines, all of them, they came. The science delivered, but how fast we can assist the science to deliver so that we are able to address the pandemic situation. So that aspect we need to bear in mind. One important part of the PIPF framework is they have the standard material transfer agreements. This standard material transfer agreements are actually something we learned from the HIV/AIDS epidemic, because HIV/AIDS gave us a lot of learning on how IPR and other issues need to be looked at. And this is why we also got the medicines patent pool going, which was an area which has been negotiating for agreements and for better access in terms of intellectual property. So how these different bodies can get together, whatever information we have, through this PIPF and through standard material transfer agreements, could also benefit from what we have learned from HIV/AIDS. And I think the MPP, the role of that mechanism also needs to be studied, and how we can better influence the accord so that we can get access. This is, I thought we need to just highlight a little. I have brought this just to, this slide I put up to say that WHO itself was established because we were looking at international trade, commerce, and other aspects. It is a different matter. Trade and commerce have evolved now to look more at intellectual property rights and other issues. But if you look at the first International Sanitary Conference which took place, that was also a response to the cholera epidemics. And then that led to all these detailed years that I have put up over here. We had the Inter-American Sanitary Convention. And then we got the Office International de Epizootics, and all this combined together in the CDC, which is playing a major role in the US, was established in 1946. And then we had the 1948, we got WHO. So a lot of, when we look at our work in WHO, we actually were intended to make sure we don't let pandemics happen. And this is what we need to bear in mind and see how we can strengthen the mechanism to make sure these are in place. And this slide, I shared that on the WHO. This is the slide I shared just to say that after the international sanitary regulations came about, for even the IHR to come into place, you look at the timelines, and it is only in 2005 that we got a new IHR treaty, which the IHR regulation, which the member states adopted just before the 2009 swine flu pandemic began. And some of the learnings from this IHR are very critical in terms of how we move ahead in terms of the pandemic. So I was asked also to say, this is to discuss the trade and policy coherence and what would be achieved in the final draft of the WHO pandemic agreement. And these are just a few of my thoughts. I have not, I'm sure with further discussion, we will have greater clarity. But some of the things that I thought we need to mention is that when we look at the international health regulations, we have a wealth of information because it has developed over a period of time. We also have the pandemic influenza preparedness framework where we were looking at benefit sharing. And there was a positive contribution being made even by the pharmaceutical industry for the first time. So if we have the demand, can the supply side also with proper ethical framework somehow be asked to join in terms of a crisis and make sure things happen? And I think there is a reason for this, because I don't know, when we were following the COVID-19, many of these multinational companies said they will not force their patents or enforce their patents. They decided to waive the patents. And for how long? So we need to look at those systems also while we are looking beyond in terms of the treaty. I don't know, when we were looking at the global strategy and plan of action for innovation and public health, we were looking at alternative mechanisms, including a research and development treaty. And at that time, I remember we had more than 108 or 9 different kinds of suggestions how we could do better without the patent system. And a lot of discussion took place, including prize funds and others, but it doesn't appear to have actually got any traction for whatever reason. While on the one hand, we could look for a better system and see how we can do better, given that a lot of initial R&D work is being done by academic institutions. So we are looking at a forward-looking treaty. So perhaps we need to give both parts to it. One, within the existing system, what we can do better. And second, can we look at a better mechanism into getting the R&D out into the public domain so that from the academic institutions so that it can serve the purpose. That may be a long-term goal because currently it appears a lot of, and another thing I saw when I was looking at the patents in COVID-19, we have all these technologies, the mRNA technology, the DNA technology, the cell-based technology, and on every technology, the patents are numerous. So if we are going to waive a patent, which is the mother patent, and what has happened is that each patent is actually attracting venture capital funding. So it leads to private obligations as well. So if you are waiving, it's so intricate when I went back into each and every patent that it's a web. So when we talk about a waiver in an multinational connection, what has to be waived? We have to be very clear. Otherwise, we will take very long just discussing a waiver. And similarly, as has just happened, that by the time the waiver came, COVID-19 vaccines also are not. The offtake has stopped because people feel now it's over and we don't really need it. And there is another science and a school of thought which says that yes, we should not unnecessarily vaccinate our people. So there is a lot of discussion on that, and we need greater clarity. Perhaps the academic and the science community also should be engaged so that they give us better thoughts onto how we can move forward on the treaty. So, so the PIPF, when we talked about virus sharing, we have these tech transfer. Again, in technology transfer, it is a time-consuming process. So while different countries should look at tech transfer, not everybody needs to do local production and tech transfer. So how can we make sure that those countries which have small populations and cannot do tech transfer or produce local product, not go ahead for local production, can we afford, give them a mechanism where they have they have access to the latest technology, whether it is vaccines or therapeutics. We were talking about vaccines, we have the therapeutics, and that's another a whole range of products. Then we have diagnostics, another huge range of products. The advantage, of course, in diagnostics is that the patents are shorter because the diagnostics tend to change and the patents life is shorter. But can we look at all of these and see how can these smaller countries access the science and make sure that they do have access to the vaccines and or any product that is needed during a pandemic. So so while we one size fit all may not work because their reality is different, and we should not have an issue where they don't have access. And one of the things which I was discussing with Dr. Suryavan when we were having the preparatory meeting was that perhaps we can look at things in 2 baskets. I was telling her, I said, there were certain things which are doable, the kind of issues that was raised by Dr. Subapak in terms of, movement of the product. So we had the customs issues, or we had issues of just speed in terms of addressing when we knew what had to be done. And a second aspect, which is the second basket, which covers this larger gamut, which is more, we need the science, we need the academics, we need everybody to sit together and think and give the best ideas on how we should go forward. So perhaps we should look at that. And another point which I thought I will mention is the product expiry. I don't know, those of you who were, when we had the H1N1 pandemic and we had to, the vaccines after a while got expired and then they were had to be thrown away. So, we need to look at the product shelf life, particularly human health is so critical. We cannot have a vaccine coming at a time when there is just a few weeks left for it to be expired. So that puts additional pressure on the countries, and the whole system needs to be seen as to how we will speed it up, because speed is of essence when we look at a pandemic. And then I've just mentioned about IP and tech transfer and how tech transfer takes its own period of time. So perhaps we can see how that aspect also is there. We can have a basic capacity for tech transfer. Thailand has capacity in our region, Indonesia and India have capacity. But how will this tech transfer take place, which is critical and fast enough so that we don't lose time? As the pandemic was announced in 2020, and it took almost a whole year and more than a year and 2 years to get out of it. And can we not speed it up? We are looking at an accord, so ideally it should be really fast so that we get the vaccines or therapeutics or everything out, because a lot of good science is sitting in the institutions which should immediately move. So how can we get speed built into the pandemic accord is something I thought would be useful. And in this, when I was thinking, I thought some of the last bullet I have said is the pandemic exigency response in a treaty. What can we do to make it better? And I was thinking that perhaps we need a multi-dimensional kind of approach. The Framework Convention on Tobacco Control is easy. I mean, it's difficult, but what I mean easy in the sense we know it's tobacco. We know it is something to do with a tobacco product. But when we are looking at the pandemic response, all vaccines, not just in the basket of vaccines, you have the mRNA, the DNA, and these cell-based different processes that they are talking. So that is one complexity, that the product itself is different. So can we? It's not going to be like a Framework Convention treaty, which is just tobacco and tobacco products. Of course, we have different tobacco products, but the underlying is it is tobacco. But here it is going to be very different, because a diagnostic will be very different from a therapeutic, and will be very different from a vaccine. So we need to handle the multi-dimensional aspect, and we perhaps need to look at distinguish it from the FCTC when the INB is sitting, and see how we want to look long term. And the second part is that science is complex in the pathogens. Every time we are producing a vaccine from the virus, the science is also different, and we need to look at that. And then the role of the FDA for market authorization, how we bring that out into the market to make sure that it has this quality, safety, and efficacy. In this, the US FDA for the first time went on with a roll-on review. So we didn't finish clinical trial 1 completely, and we went into 2, then we went into 3 and 4. And we did have emergency use authorization, but the National Regulatory Authority was critical, because every country decided whether they are ready to go ahead with the vaccine. So that was another point. And then we created certain facilities like the oxygen plants. And in some of the, for better oxygen during COVID-19. And now when I see some of the countries, they're all lying vacant, are not used. So, it's a waste of resources. So can we plan better so that we don't waste resources? And I mentioned time is of the essence for making the technology transfer happen. So we probably need a multi-pronged approach. Probably the INB can set up a group which can be drawn upon immediately to sit down and with the different sectors, and then come up with outcomes and decisions which are very important. And this, Dr. Suvit, is my last slide. It is a little complicated, but I will not spend time on it. I only put up this slide to say that, there was a Feinberg report by Dr. Harvey Feinberg from the US Institute of Medicine. And they, in January 10, this was a committee convened by WHO, and they looked at the IHR, and they also looked at the influenza pandemic. And they have given about 15 recommendations. I thought that, up to 2010, this report has a lot of wisdom. And perhaps we can start from this report and see what we learned in COVID, and if we can marry the two, perhaps we will have more answers. because they have also looked at the ones in red. So they, I've just highlighted. Summary conclusion 1 talks about concerns on the objectives of trade and travel. So what is trade? They've actually looked at international trade in relation to potential public health emergencies should be more evidence-based. How do we collect the evidence? And then in summary conclusion 2, they have clearly said that talked about advance agreements for vaccine distribution and delivery. So can we develop templates which a group can probably put into action as soon as we have that? And recommendation 14, if you look over here, these are just few that I highlighted from here. They talk that agreement should be reached on sharing of influenza vaccines and influenza viruses and access to vaccines and other benefits. And they have talked about the global action plan for influenza vaccines and to look at that program also of WHO. That is to say, this report has a lot of wisdom, that a lot of work is already there in different pockets. And if we can collect it all together, perhaps we can address some of the issues that we are trying to better. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we probably have less and less time. And as you rightly put it, time is of essence. Time is very critical. And I believe that however highly ambitious we are moving forward. And I think you put it very correctly that the pandemic accord is something that we are looking forward to, and we want to make sure that it's forward looking, what we can do better, and some new areas that you have recommended, I think needs to be discussed very quickly. I'm sure it's going to take time, but as long as we keep the ambition alive, and I think the experience from COVID is still fresh, and that's why we want to make sure that we, start and continue and try to achieve something very, very soon. I'm leaving my third and last speaker waiting for a while. Dr. Viviana, are you still with us? Hello, can I hear you?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I cannot hear you. Just a minute,
Hello?
please, because we cannot hear you right at the moment. Well, as we are waiting, let me introduce our last speaker, Dr. Viviana Munoz Chayes. She's the coordinator of Health, Intellectual Property and Biodiversity Program, HIBPB, South Center. Dr. Viviana is a multidisciplinary policy expert in the area of public health and intellectual property and innovation. She holds a master's in development management from the LSE in London and a PhD in management of technology from EPFL Lausanne. And I think that's a brief introduction. Maybe you can introduce yourself further with your area of interest and specialization. But what I would like to ask you, if you can hear me, right? If you can hear me, please nod.
I can hear you.
Yes,
I hope you
cannot
can hear me.
at the moment. So
Okay.
I would like to ask you to provide further comments, from Dr. Manisha's comprehensive briefing, whether you have any comments on the draft WHO pandemic agreement or any specific comments on the challenges. And also, if you can discuss further on the role of the geopolitics, I think it comes into the picture and it's unavoidable to think of geopolitics because in all international negotiations, whether it's the WHO Accord or what I work on, something like South China Sea, the Code of Conduct, it's tedious and it takes like decades. So what I would like to ask you this process. And last but not least is the assessment on the draft WHO agreement, whether it would balance trade and health interest. So hopefully that we can hear you right now. Dr. Viviana, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure to be virtually with you. Thanks to the National Commission on International Trade and Health Studies and the International Health Policy Program of Thailand for this invitation, Dr. Suriwan and all the team for the excellent preparations, and Dr. Suet, your excellent moderation in the session, and to the previous very excellent speakers. Of course, I'll just be following from, I think, Dr. Manisha's, in particular's last comments, since she has done a very comprehensive coverage of what's in the text. So just to note, I work at the South Center, which I hope many of you will know. We're a think tank, intergovernmental of developing countries. So we have 55 country members, and we work with the broader group of G77 and China constituency. We're based in Geneva, but we also do regional level trainings, national level trainings, capacity buildings, and we're very much involved with the New York processes as well. So we're very closely following the negotiations and participating and supporting the delegations in Geneva, in particular, in the proposals and in the engagement on this complex negotiation that's taking place. And of course, it's quite broad in scope, but also because of the multiple interlinkages with other areas. So I will address the first question on the geopolitical context, which is very interesting. As was mentioned, the pandemic instrument negotiation is aiming to finalize by May 2024. And part of the reason why this date was so important is because this is a year of elections in the United States. And we generally know that one of the lead candidates of the Republican Party would not likely be favorable to any kind of international agreement within the World Health Organization. So you may recall that Trump had actually proposed for the United States to leave the World Health Organization itself in his previous, when he was president previously. So that is a challenge, the context in the United States in particular, for the future of this negotiation. So speeding up that process for May would be helpful. At the same time, it's been known that in the United States, the whole treaty ratification process is a complex one, having to go through Congress and so forth for approvals. So therefore, there's still the question that even if the instrument is finalized, whether the United States would become a party or not. Regardless of that, the instrument would, of course, become best practice, and so eventually it would be, still have that impact overall. So even if the United States context is quite complex, we can see the true value of this instrument if we are able to negotiate in this tight framework. So one of the challenges is really giving that particular context of the United States to see, can we advance with sufficient ambition, but at the same time realistic of where the text is now, to this deadline of May 2024. The other issue, of course, is that the international health regulations are also being amended at the same time. So there's that opportunity to ensure that there is also coherence with those amendments that are being proposed in the international health regulations, as that document will be applicable directly to all WHO member states without requiring some of these, national processes. So it is important to ensure that some of the critical areas of the pandemic instrument can also be reflected as far as possible in the amendment process of the international health regulations, in case we have a failure of the current process or a prolongation of the pandemic treaty, which might create some of these concerns at the other level. Another aspect of geopolitics is a sort of mistrust that we might have between certain countries, in particular with regards to technology sharing, which might limit the possibilities of having more ambitious texts that we really need in the area of international collaboration and cooperation for enhancing technological developments through co-creation and really sharing of information, having much more transparency from basic research to elaborating clinical trials in a manner that's more transparent and that facilitates sharing of information rather replication. And then through the whole supply chains as well, a lot more sharing that would help, of course, become overall more prepared to potential pandemics with issues such as managing national or regional stockpiles and many of the issues that Dr. Manisha has already mentioned. So the fact that we have a sort of some tensions among major country powers, which create some of this mistrust and tension, might make it more difficult, on the one hand, to have this environment towards technology sharing and technology transfer sharing. And on the other hand, it also may make it difficult in terms of national politics in selling the international instrument domestically. So we have seen this already, that there is some tension from domestic opposition in a way about potentially being seen the pandemic instrument as giving away some national sovereignty towards the World Health Organization in several countries. And of course, that pushback does complicate a bit the context. So WHO, I think, has been making a fantastic effort to trying to counter some of those sort of arguments about the treaty taking away sovereignty of countries, and really focusing on the fact that we are talking about, a global challenge where we need international cooperation. So I'll move on to the issue basically of some of the specific elements of the draft pandemic instrument, and some of the particular challenges in relation to trade aspects. I would start by saying that what is the status quo versus where we want to go? Because I think this was mentioned before, saying we don't want, I think Dr. Suva, you said it very clearly, we don't want the status quo. So what is it that we need to change? And what we saw in the pandemic, I mean, we have had pandemics before, but this COVID-19 pandemic really showed, gaps from basic preparedness and towards then developing tools, then the high inequity in terms of putting everyone on board for their own response. So really this treaty is about coordination, cooperation, and collaboration, and addressing the issues of inequities, in particular among the capacities of countries, both in prevention and preparedness and in response. So this is why we have, a challenging context in the sense that we do not want just provisions that will apply domestically. So just national obligations. For example, the International Health Regulations is framed in that sense. Even the FTCT is generally about disciplining private firms, so the tobacco companies, so disciplines that all countries should establish at national level. What here we want to establish a collaborative framework for many particular areas in order to reach common objectives. So this is something quite new. And even though WHO, with the objective of health for all, we have this common goal, there is this tension between national interests, even competition in different areas. And with the aspects of trade, of course, there's very strong players which wish to maintain a sort of competitive trade environment versus entering into this space, which is more collaborative, which means more transparent, which means more sharing. And there's perhaps some mistrust about, does that mean that if you are the stronger parties, you will be made to provide more of your technology, of your sharing, and what will be the gains back? So that is somehow the real context is that if we have a treaty that only has obligations at national level, we will not be able to reach the specific goals that really require that higher level of collaboration and coordination. And specifically, we need an acceptance to address the issues of inequity, which means assisting other countries and other vulnerable populations in a different way that we saw during COVID-19. So with that, I'll just address some of the few examples of what are the issues that the instrument are addressing, and what would be some of the important actions that we seek through some of these articles. So one of the issues is on the aspects of research and development for new medical countermeasures. As I mentioned, the issue of technology co-creation is an idea, is strong in the text. This, for example, from an earlier stage of research, there is the goal to increase or enhance overall the clinical trial capacities that countries have. In developing countries, increasingly, there are substantial capacities for elaborating clinical trials. Many manufacturers even rely on some of these clinical trial capacities in developing countries, but then this does not necessarily enhance, for example, access to the outcomes of that research that has been done and clinical trials that have been done in developing countries. So there is that aim to have an increased coordination and collaboration in clinical trials, as well as aligning much more what are the research and development priorities that we have overall. So WHO had been previously doing work on this, but then we saw that many of the, let's say then that the actors were not necessarily aligning their targets on R&D according to perhaps what WHO was providing as general guidance. So this would be to have more of a pathway for aligning overall on the research and development priorities. Another important area is leveraging the public financing that is given for research and development. So we have a research and development environment, which in particular, when we have the need for products that do not have, let's say, a big market that is interesting or very high profit based for pharmaceutical companies, we see that there's a gap and there's a need for public funding to go into these areas. And so, for example, we have a lot of public-private partnerships, institutions that generally are set up nonprofit, trying to then leverage the skills of private sector, but bringing in different incentives to make products more affordable, as well as much more targeted to the particular disease that is needed. So in the case of a pandemic, you already have this sort of assured market because there will be an extreme need and very quick need, and price will become less the issue. So you already have a substantial amount of public financing coming in. And what the treaty is trying to see is, can we also ensure that we add conditions tied to providing this public financing for research and development? So that, for example, if you have private parties, so the pharmaceutical companies that do receive substantial also or rely a lot of the public funded research and development early on, that then they have to have some access provisions, for example, through the contracts that they have when they receive public financing, or even for, it could be academic institutions, and then if they're passing on patents, for example, that this will carry over, to ensure affordability of products, or at least, for example, an equitable allocation. If it is for a pandemic product, for example, if it's going to be production vaccines, that we could say, well, you should keep at least a minimum amount to be defined of vaccine capacity that would be either for the global mechanism for equitable sharing or directly for developing country sales, versus what you might establish as bilateral contracts for uphand procurement through a few, rich countries that might actually buy out large quantities, and then there's nothing available for the rest of the market for at least a period of time when it's critical to expand access. So leveraging public funding for R&D is really important to have more concrete elements. So those are some of the elements in Article 9 on research and development. Another issue is about transparency, that if we want to have a much more collaborative research and development environment, we need to know much more about, what are actually the costs, what are, in particular in the private sector, it's very difficult to know exactly how much is being invested and how much financing is being provided. So by having more transparency on these issues, it might also help to balance the playing field in terms of the public sector contributions and what is received from the private parties involved. So basically leveraging up the kind of schemes we have of public-private partnerships, but at a much more global level. Another very important part of the instrument, of course, is to have a better distribution globally about capacities of production of pandemic-related products. So there's many different elements of this goal in the instrument, and Dr. Manisha already discussed several of these. One of them is, for example, having assured production facilities around the globe, around the different regions, so that if we, for example, find a successful product, a new vaccine, for example, that we won't have a problem that there was in COVID early on of saying, well, there's not sufficient entities that are able to quickly, even if the technology was transferred, would they be able to accelerate production quickly? And of course, even in COVID, there was more production facilities that were available than those that were used. because there was a limit in terms of the private companies were deciding which were those partners they wanted to use. So it was not open for everyone to participate. But here we would want to have something more coordinated where we could already identify minimum capacities that there should exist at regional level and have a process to ensure that those capacities are maintained in pandemic times as well, so that we don't have, as Dr. Manisha mentioned, problems that, you have either facilities or just capacities that are underused. Related to this issue, of course, is about transfer of technology and know-how. At the same time, it's not only, we're not discussing transfer of technology in the, let's say, traditional trade sense, just in terms of, our patents or other forms of IP available, or about commercialization rights. But we are generally talking about access to those different elements of being able to have more production capacity, developing technological capabilities and know-how, because many times you will need extra information that is beyond the pure technological aspect to be able to then learn how to reproduce the technology. So one example of this has been the WHO-supported mRNA hub, which, though it's still a minor scale, there's just one hub in South Africa. The idea is to develop it into a center, let's say, of training, where different parties from around the world could then access and leverage this openness, let's say, of capacity building of this technology, and then be able to apply that more openly. And so even with the mRNA hub, we might see, well, there are problems, including on intellectual property issues, the clearance of IP issues, if it's beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, so issues about sustainability of the approach. But the idea there that these kind of hubs can be established is very important, because it shows already that this is something that has tried and it works, and it's really needed. So we need to elaborate more sort of these mechanisms for facilitating technology transfer and know-how. The issue of the waiver of intellectual property, as well as addressing concerns of trade secrets as barriers to access technology and know-how, that I think has been very well discussed prior. It's just, I'd like to note again that this is a priority for developing countries, because we, on the one hand, we do have substantial technological capacities, both in terms of know-how in academia, but then we also need is to find better ways to have more partnerships that can be not necessarily the traditional partnerships where the private sector then decides only the last stage, let's say the fill and finish for vaccines, but we want to be able to go beyond that and really learn from the process. And this will require a much more flexible, let's say, environment for research and development and for access to technology. So one way to do that, and I think Dr. Manisha, I really like that you highlighted that is really to rethink what's the model we're doing. For example, for pandemics, when we don't want just trade to operate in the usual trade framework. We already have a trade framework where, whoever is able to produce a product and then sell in the global market will do so. We actually want a different system where we're saying, for a pandemic, which is a global health crisis, we need to establish a system where we will have research and development bolstered by public sector financing, and in return, we're going to have an open sort of framework where we're not going to, have this secrecy and these other, let's say, tools of IP that would be normally to provide an incentive to have profits, because we're assuring through the new system we're building for pandemics, for these specific emergency situations, we're assuring that there will be substantial payoffs if you are able to develop your innovation. But the payoffs are not countered in a way about, your share of market. It'll be more in terms of the contribution that's being done to elaborating access overall globally to this tool. And we do need to find, of course, that the incentives are aligned with the need for research and development investment to also come from private sector. But this can be done. The ideas were well thought through in that process when WHO was elaborating R&D models in the context for particular diseases that are neglected. And this could be scaled up, and this could be part of the discussion. And it is unfortunate that we haven't been able to introduce that. The positive element right now is really we do have a clear objective of saying we need to have more capacities in terms of production facilities, in terms of technology transfer and know-how, sort of have a new deal. But the language right now that's on the articles is very vague. We don't have any real commitments that would show that this might actually happen, or that countries, particularly those that have the lead, for example, pharmaceutical vaccine production companies, there doesn't seem to be any language that they are negotiating that suggests that they would be willing to introduce some kind of conditionalities, which is what we're looking for in terms of the agreements that they would have with them for public financing for them, or in their government procurement agreements to ensure that there's some access provisions and technology transfer. So what is being offered is to say, well, we can have some language on facilitated licensing, but licensing, which is voluntary licensing, is just going to take us in a way back to the stage of usual trade framework, where it's up to the party that holds the technology to decide if and when to license. On this, I would just add to what had been discussed previously on intellectual property, is that there are a lot of mechanisms that countries domestically and regionally could use when there is, for example, not an interest license, or the terms offered for licensing are not sufficient. There are compulsory licensing and the waiver for vaccines that was agreed in WTO. It doesn't provide a very comprehensive framework, but it does elaborate on one point in terms of facilitating export under that waiver. But there are there's a range of other mechanisms that can be used, and we should have seen, and we did not see sufficient use during the COVID pandemic. So South Center, for example, also noted that there's an article in the TRIPS agreement, Article 73, which actually would allow, as part of an emergency, to just simply override any intellectual property domestically if that was an obstacle in terms of accessing the technology that would be necessary to scale up production of an essential product. So we did not see any country invocating that, but just to note, there's a lot of work to do in pandemic times to build capacity at country level and within different ministries about what are the mechanisms already that can be used to deal with these problems, at the same time while we try to pursue a global solution through the pandemic instrument, and of course through the WTO as well, separately, as the discussion continues. Then let me just mention the other issue with regards to the procurement contracts that governments make. This is a really important issue, because in the COVID pandemic, we saw that these pre-purchase contracts for vaccines really shaped the market. So basically, at the critical time when we needed a wide vaccine distribution, or at least that there would have been, based on where there was the most need, more vaccines being drifted, we saw that a few developed countries had already bought up the share of production of vaccines. And there's absolutely nothing to regulate that, to say, no, there must be a limitation to what can be included in those agreements. So that's another element that's being discussed through the context of Article 13, or it could be within the scope as well of Article 11. But the instrument should have something about what are the terms and conditions in government procurement contracts, in particular when we have a limited production capacity for an essential product during a pandemic. And also there hasn't been anything on regulating donations. It would be important that we do, for example, there was many products where they were being donated just when they're about to expire. And so there has been absolutely nothing specified on this, including on who pays for the logistics of this transfers. So that all fits within the scope of the instrument, and it needs to go much more in detail on these issues. Then on access and benefit sharing issues with regards to the proposed WHO pathogen access and benefit sharing system, that's a priority for developing countries in Article 12. What we would want to see is, on the one hand, there has been a call from developed countries mainly to say we need to ensure a rapid sharing of samples and of genetic sequence data of pathogens with pandemic potential. And they would like to see an amendment in the International Health Regulation already to state that there should be, absolutely no conditions on sharing of samples and genetic sequence data for pathogens of epidemic potential. Now, this would not necessarily be consistent with for the application of the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing and the CBD, unless in that context it was decided. They could decide, it could be decided on that other legal framework that this could be considered, a specialized instrument. But this is something, it's complex, but it's very important in the principle of sharing. We do need to see the concept of fair and equitable sharing of benefits. If we are to, share openly, because the whole treaty should be about more sharing and more access, then it should be in all aspects. It should be from sharing samples to sharing technology, to sharing information, to sharing clinical trial data. All this should be consistent throughout the text. And here we have a push in one area from developed countries saying, well, we need to have rapid access to pathogen information, but we want to keep, closed off for technology, closed off for intellectual property, etc. And then so this is part of the inconsistency on this aspect. And we say, well, then if we will have this discussion about rapid and facilitated access here, which is important in a pandemic, we want to ensure is, for example, at minimum, that we will have a fair framework for access to medical products, to vaccines, to diagnostics, to treatments. And that is part of what is being discussed, really underlying Article 12 discussions on this WHO access and benefits sharing system is, do we have any assurance that we're going to have a better system for access to vaccines and other medical products than we did in COVID-19? And so far, the other provisions of the instrument is not giving us that certainty. So two complementary areas of the treaty to these goals is the implementation capacities and support. So the treaty also has a lot of detailed obligations on countries to increase prevention. So these are adding to the range of already obligations and the international health regulations that would potentially come through this instrument itself. And that's in the whole first section of this instrument. So there is a big question about how to ensure that there will be implementation capacity, so support in particular for countries that most need it, and then financing, because there will be a need to substantially mobilize financial resources towards the operation of these enhanced mechanisms, including for research and development, as well as for ensuring, assured production capacities around the world in all regions. So let me just turn now, last point, to suggestions on the way forward. As you know, we have a negotiating body continuing. It will be more and more intense discussions from here to May, the next in March. I think on the sidelines, it would be really important to have stronger regional discussions, simply because there's a lot of these issues that can be advanced as well regionally. For example, on the issues of stockpiling, issues about improving clinical trial frameworks at regional level, regulatory aspects. So many aspects of this could be advanced at regional level. Even the discussion about the adequate access and benefit sharing framework, to come with a regional approach, it would be very helpful. We have a significant close cooperation in terms of the negotiating position by the African group, and we don't see that yet reflected necessarily through all regions. So that would just be a suggestion to perhaps try to tighten up that regional discourse and to continue to focus on what can be advanced regionally, which will then also support the implementation itself at regional level of the instrument. And then the last point would be, of course, the increased participation in these informal negotiations as well. It's very difficult for many delegations that are small to have to follow several informal processes plus the negotiation process in Geneva. But since this is now an increasing pace, it would be very important to have as detailed participation as possible and coordination among the broader group of developing countries as well. So I'll stop there and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Vienna. Well, you can hear the round of applause. That means you have made very clear and comprehensive presentation. Thank you. And I think we have a little time for the discussion, but we still will continue with the discussion, right? I think we heard a lot from all the three speakers, especially Dr. Viviana, who talked about the challenges of geopolitics. Of course, mistrust is the key word. And it's very difficult to build trust nowadays, but we still have to try. And we have to be ambitious and forward-looking. So all the concepts that Dr. Viviana has been trying to propose is very hopeful. You know, when you talk about transparency, when you talk about openness, when you talk about even partnership for sustainability, it's all very crucial. But whether we can make it in practice, you left it, you know, at the end of your presentation about implementation and financing. Those are the key things that will make the Concord effective or not. You know, it's not just the Concord itself, but the accord itself, but it's how we implement it and how we make it effective in a sustainable manner. So I will right now stop with the three speakers and open the floor to our participants here or even online to make any questions, comments, or if you want to propose any recommendations, because what we want to get out of this session is to have some deliberations on the recommendations and good suggestions like regional discussion or participation in informal negotiations that Dr. Viviana has highlighted. So anyone, please introduce yourself briefly before you speak and make your comments.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Watson-Grant. I work with GSI on the USA funded Country Health Information System programs. My question is about data. So I heard this is a really fascinating topic very often, and I've wondered about cross-border, cross-country data sharing, because of course that's an issue that will come up in pandemics, and I didn't hear, I might have missed this, but I didn't hear it, this as a topic very strongly in regulation. It's going to be open treaty. This would be a part of
Dr. Manisha or Dr. Viviana, anyone who wants to take the floor, answer this question. Dr. Viviana, you can hear the question, right?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I fully was able to capture what the question was. I think it was about cross-border sharing of data, but if
Yes,
perhaps
that's right. Yes.
could.
Cross-border sharing in terms of information in particular, right? Dr. Manisha wants to take the floor to answer. Yes.
So I think you made a very important point. When the regulations as part of the share that and information on any issue of concern, they call it a public health. So any issue which is of concern to public should be shared. And in fact, this sharing of information is part of the IHR framework that has been established. The question, as you rightly said, was that how to, the veracity of the information is also important. Another aspect which particularly the CDC Atlanta has been doing, they regularly scan all the social media and other information, and they look for information which is available on any potential disease threats. And that has also been something which has been going on for some time. I don't deal with this directly in terms of data sharing. There is another person dealing with it, but this is an aspect which is under consideration as well. And I think it is an important point to say it should find its place in the accord, and to that extent.
So right at the moment, there is no articles that address this issue directly.
I don't think there is an article with directly mentions in terms of data sharing, but it's over to Vivian if you think some article is looking at it directly or indirectly.
Viviana, you have any thought?
Yeah, as far as I recall, there is a principle where generally it states that the implementation of the instrument should be in line with whatever would be the national requirements with regards to data protection. It can be also privacy laws and so forth. Also, it includes potential obligations on non-disclosure, for example, in private contracts. So I recall there is that principle. I don't recall in any particular article that there would be something specific about data protection itself. But in terms of sharing of data, there is several aspects where it's included, in particular on research and development article, as well as in the Article 13, which is looking at supply chain issues. But it's not specifically directed to data. It could be different forms of information that the article refers to specifically.
Well, good comment, actually. They can think about it when they go into the next round of conversation. Yes, sir. The gentleman at the back first, with the microphone, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Okay.
My name is Dev. I'm a PhD.
And Bruce, you
student.
next. Okay.
My name is Dev. I'm a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh, looking to improve biosafety and biosecurity governance in laboratory in Southeast Asia. But Thailand is a case study. My question is mainly directed to Dr. Viviana. I have similar opinions to you on many of the articles that you addressed in the pandemic treaty, but my question is, how does one strike a balance when the power in the negotiation appears to be very heavily towards developed countries at the moment? For instance, rushing this treaty to be finished by May 2024 for the US elections, and balancing that with such quite strong contention points at the moment, especially with the sharing of genetic information and sequencing data that is part of Article 12. My thoughts are that this might be in the form of national blocks or regional blocks, but what kind of regional blocks would you want to see in this negotiation, or maybe some more information from where you are standing or sitting at the moment?
I think she's in Geneva. Okay, well, Dr. Viviana, did you hear the question about striking
Yes,
the
it
right,
was very
right balance? Yeah, and if I may add, is also about some players in the negotiation actually has strong views about IP rights as well. They are against waiving IP rights, something like that. I think something like striking the right balance is very critical at this juncture.
Yeah, so I would say one of the issues in terms of advancing the positions is really that coordination among developing countries. So for example, there is a cross-regional group called the Group of Equity. And that has been important in a way of showing that this is not, a single country or single region demand, but these are really the large membership of WHO members that are asking for these issues to be included. So that I think is really critical, because there's a lot of informals happening whereby even sometimes the delegations themselves don't know which is the last text we're looking at, So really trying to ensure close coordination is one of the most helpful areas. In this area about sharing, rapid sharing of pathogen-related information, there is already some experience. I mean, WHO has been developing the biohub, so some ideas of how it should function. So we're not operating, let's say, in fully new territory, but developing countries are not really the ones that are pressing for this issue, because there is already a regime that is, let's say, deciding on how this sharing should happen. And the reality is most countries are sharing rapidly. So I would say that is not an issue for developing countries to push on. It's more the responses. If you want this to be inside the pandemic instrument, then it has to be with fair and equitable benefit sharing. But I would say even if we don't have the Article 12 included, it's not developing countries that are really the ones that are demanding this system to be established. I would push more that the real priorities for developing countries should be in the aspects related to ensuring a more equitable access to the fruits, let's say, of innovation, and that the way we do innovation takes into account the capacities of developing countries through much more, a more real partnership that builds on everyone's capacities in this new framework. And because we're in a health instrument, we're not doing a trade instrument. It's a health instrument. So this would be the opportunity to reshape how we think about innovation for pandemics. And their developing countries have a lot of capacities to also provide.
Thank you, Dr. Vietnam. Bruce. Next question. Yeah, Bruce.
Simple question. This session's entitled Treaty to the Core. It's been down. Second question is separate from the framework for 4 years. It takes forever to do this. Is there any effort T. Frost? Could you hear any of that?
I think you may have to
Okay.
speak up again.
All right, so
I'm so
okay,
sorry about the microphone.
So treaty accord, what's that about? And the second one is separate from this, driven by the U.S. elections, is driven by a pandemic that happened tomorrow. And if it takes 4 years to hammer out a treaty, there'll be a pandemic before it gets there. So what do we do in the meantime to make some progress? Because here the perfect will be the enemy of the good.
Maybe Dr. Manisha first, since you're here and you can hear him more clearly.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, I wish we had the answers to your question, because at the end of the day, the treaty will come into being when the countries agree on the text. And I do believe that in the exigencies of preventing a next pandemic, and if you actually look at it, we had the H1N1 2009, and then this came about in after 10, it's a periodic 10-year cycle. 20, yes, that's true, but we had the larger one. So it is something that we do need to prepare for. And therefore, I think in the interest of, exactly in the interest that you're saying, there should be a pressure on the countries to negotiate and do better. Now, whether they actually do it, we can only see what happens after it goes through. And the treaty is very ambitious. And a treaty is more binding than a resolution, or than even the regulation, as we can see in the Constitution as well. And since it's a binding instrument, it on the one hand has to address all the concerns, I guess, which we have mentioned, and also have the flexibility and the agility to be able to deliver during the pandemic. And that's, I think, the critical part when they are negotiating. I actually started my presentation by saying that I wish Dr. Viroj was here. He could have given us more insight, because he's right there on the firing line, trying to get everybody to negotiate and come together, because he's part of the vice chair as one of the groups. But I don't know how much information they can also share publicly, because I'm sure that's difficult. It's a treaty.
Treaty that's supposed to be binding, right?
Yes, a treaty.
Dr. Viviana, you had any thought on this, or can
No,
you
I
see
think as
any
it's
hopeful meaning of the accord?
No, I think it will definitely be meaningful, even if it establishes, best practice principles already that would that would be important. But I do think in any case, it's worth saying that a lot is going on at the same time. I mean, through WHO itself discussions on the R&D blueprint, a lot of lessons are already been taken forth in terms of improving regulatory aspects as well. So let's just, I mean, the idea is also that those good lessons can be incorporated into, into the text to be kept there more specifically. But clearly, all the details will also be need to spelled out much more. That's why I think the regional level is also really important, particularly for developing countries, because individually we just do not have the force and the market power as well to outcompete, for example, even on purchasing Europe and the United States. So that's why I think that at the same time to continue to move on the regional level frameworks for implementation, but even if we don't get the treaty implementation, we already know the areas we need to work on. So that area of generally South-South cooperation is also critical to continue to develop and not wait for the treaty to do it.
I believe there's something going on and that is already beneficial in itself. So the aims, it's not just the accord, but the means could be the aims itself, and it has meaningful contributions to whatever that we have to face if the pandemic will happen tomorrow, as Bruce say, it can happen anytime. I think we have to, last two questions, please, and then we have to conclude the session at 8.
Check 1, 2. There we go. Thanks for all the super interesting information. It's helpful to understand a bit, and we've talked about some of like the information flows, financial flows, that type of thing. I'm interested in some of the governance implications of some of this stuff. Does some of the things being talked about at the moment talk about creating or setting up any new structures, or how we structuring the governance side of this? And are there any sort of implications there?
Okay, question on governance, maybe Dr. Yes. Maybe we take 2 questions in a row, and then we end this session after this. Please introduce yourself as well.
Robert Chigil is my name. I work for Family Health International based in North Carolina. My question, fortunately you have the mic. My question is to you. You systematically presented to us how Thailand was able to respond to the COVID pandemic. So now that we've heard from Dr. Manisha and Dr. Vivian, if I was to create a blend of what both of them said, and maybe turn it into a checklist, how will you measure your performance in Thailand compared to whatever framework that a blend of what both of them said? How will you measure your performance? Will you say that if a pandemic is repeated tomorrow, Thailand will be ready? And when talking about that, could you look at a country like Malawi in Africa? And also, if you are not familiar with Malawi, you can choose any very small country that is properly underdeveloped and compare with Thailand and tell us how Thailand will respond should something happen tomorrow, and how Malawi will respond as well. So that we're talking about equity here. Thank you.
Okay, it's kind of the question for the pigeon competition. Is that you missed the words? Okay. Okay, for the first question about what is the changing in governance, because I'm from the governmental sector, what we can see right now, in the past, when we respond within any disease, outbreak, or the pandemic, we said that we need in the multi-sectoral collaboration. But actually, in the one partner that we need more, this is a legal officer. Actually, when we said about like a genetic, like a sharing information, we talk about how we can like transfer agreement or something. That's mean legal officer, because in Thailand we also have like a pathogen and toxins act. That means even though we would like to share genetic info, like a genetic material, we need to follow within our act. But as you can see right now in the forum of when we have like a negotiation on the pandemic treaty, most of the people that join is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or in the Ministry of Health. but we would like to see more the legal officer. That means in the each country, each member state need to expand what is going on at the global level and how involved within the at the domestic level. So legal officer need to join. That is what we would like to see. So for the right now, our Ministry of Health, when we would like to negotiate on the pandemic treaty, the new partner that we try to involve them and we just like invite them to join. It's like this is a foreigner legal officer. I think this is important right now for the how to respond within the anything that may be emerged in the future. And get back to like how we score our country, Thailand, what in there, what need to fill the gaps and even the compared to other country. Actually, when we say that IHR, we have like a one like assessment tool that we call joint external evaluation. But this is not to compare to other countries, but to compare how ourselves can reach that the goal. That in the IHR said that even though we can reach those indicators, we can respond the pandemic or the any public health emergency in the like a performance. Right now in the Thailand, we have like a use this joint external evaluation. Finding the first two that's in the we access that in 2017, and right now in the this is just last year in the for the second round, we can see the gap that occur, how we can respond if the any public health emergency occur. The first one, this is how we link within the financial sector, because in our like we can see like the silo action when the like even the pandemic emergency occur. It means that we have like in the term of the governmental sector, we have like it's kind of like we not in the cross-matic when we allocate the resource and the money to respond the disease or in the contain the disease. So that means financial partner is need to be part and understand what in kind of like how we can use like our emergency fund to relieve to respond. So this is one thing that in the we need to do more to fill the gap. And the other thing that we found, when we do something tied to like contain the disease, we can see that some like essential like medical service, for example, like providing the vaccine coverage. We can see that in the 2017, we really good in the score of in the measles vaccine. We can reach to like the level that in the we can create like a herd immunity. But for in the this time, in the second round of JE, we can see that we drop the score for the vaccine coverage in the measles. We cannot reach to like we just got only like 75% of the vaccine coverage. So it means that most of the people, they pay attention. They use their all like energy to doing their COVID-19 vaccine coverage. That means there's some like a routine immunization is done. So that means this is an important thing that how we can like maintain the essential medical service if even like for the pandemic that occur. This is the one lesson learned that we learned. But it's hard to compare with the other country because in there even the maybe it's not to compare, but in there the another like index that we call in the global health security index that in the already provided by in there some researcher, and it's already like a provide that in the how what is the gap that we need to fill. I think this is it can be like what have we learned from those assessment tools.
Thank you. And Dr. Manisha, you have any last words before we conclude?
Actually, we're looking forward to the treaty giving more than what we have on the plate as of now. As I said, we have very good learnings from the IHR because that was intended as an instrument to protect us from any untoward global incident. We also have the PIP framework, which talked about access and benefit sharing, which was a positive mechanism. And we also got the pharmaceutical industry on board in access and benefit sharing for PIPF. So we talk about the demand, where we all want the best products. And they are also part of the supply. So how it would be interesting if we can push this bracket of people as well to deliver more, along with with the instrument that we are looking at different other aspects which are already on board. Because it's a matter of global concern. Everybody needs to come together, and how to bring everybody all together for collaboration is what this treaty brings. So I think this is how we can move forward. And I don't know to what extent the WHO could have a flexible group so that as I mentioned, the time is critical. We should not spend so much of time getting the science into manufacturing and to make sure that equity is built into it. So that would be a tall ask, but we hope that we can do well.
So hope.
Thank you.
I hope so as well. Dr. Viviana, you have any last words from Geneva? Are you still with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Last words,
Yes.
please.
No, I would have no final words, just to say, you can be connected to these discussions. Normally, there are some updates about what's happening. So just invite everyone to continue to follow. And we also have a number of publications of South Tetra on these issues. Just invite you to continue on that conversation. And thank you so much for this invitation.
Okay, by way of closing, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the three ladies, great ladies. Please loud applause for the speakers. And I see this session as a good opportunity to discuss about trade, health, and how we put these two enemies, together and make sure that we have the coherence in terms of policy and practical implementation of the agreements that we are looking forward to conclude as soon as possible, as well as try to create this world as a sharing and caring world. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sweet and all panelists.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Viviana. We are going to close the session soon, but before that, because we are behind the schedule quite a lot, so I would like to invite Dr. Samphan Silvanath again to say a final remarks to all participants and also thank them for being with us until the last minute. Please.
All right, thank you. It come to the end now. I want to keep the momentum and the feeling. I think I can hear a lot of people in this room looking for something to fix the inequality. I think that's the name of the game. Trade and health will continue to be the challenging. So keep your momentum, keep your passion. This is a long journey. NCIT and IHPP in Thailand will continue to support the event. And thank you to the PMAC for allowing us to have this side event. Thank you, the MC. Thank you, the panelists. And I think we'll continue the journey and we welcome to everyone to be our partner to continue to pursue something to be good for the citizen. I'd like to close the meeting, close the event, and thank you everyone again for the nice and what a big learning event from today. Thank you.
Yes, if everyone still we would like to have group photo if possible, just one shot of the group photo, because this is quite a remarkable side meeting that we cover all of all of the key important and also challenging issues that we need to all come together. We have to keep ourselves our ambition alive, if I can use this word, our ambition alive, and also keep advocating for the benefit of the new health instruments. Thank you so much. Perhaps here, I'd like to invite everyone to the floor. Everyone, please. Everyone, please. So let's move to take 1 minute to announce our work, highlight work. We will have the NCIT and IHUP will organize the ITH conference, the annual ITH conference in November this year. We will circulate the information when it's available soon. So, but for the time being, please save the date in November. And then we also working closely with the Dr. Manisha from the CLO to organize the regional workshop on trade and health as well. If you are interested in this kind of initiative, do give us your email so that we can give you more information about this deliberation. Come. You are invited. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. You're great.